The Intervention, ACR, MP5, M16, M4A1 and the AK-74U. When you think back to the heyday of Call of Duty, all these weapons come to mind. Each unique in their own right, and they are synonymous with childhood of anyone who claims to be a Call of Duty fan. Why then have these iconic weapon names been removed from the Call of Duty mythos and instead replaced with underwhelming, unrecognizable names such as the Kastov, Lockman and the TAC? This video is going to be a dive into the controversy surrounding Call of Duty weapon names, giving an insight into a few reasons as to why these names have been removed from the Call of Duty mythos and ditched in favour of these somewhat boring weapon names. So, where did it all start? Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the 2009 iteration of the franchise, is heralded as one of, if not the best iteration of Call of Duty. It sold over 25 million copies and generated over $1 billion in sales. And in that game, the ACR was the go-to assault rifle. However, unbeknownst to the customer base, according to a report made by the Wall Street Journal, this was all a part of an agreement made between the weapon manufacturers Remington and Activision, the game developer, in which they agreed to put one of Remington's rifles into the popular video game franchise Call of Duty as part of a marketing plan to reach young customers, according to internal emails and company records. The report goes on to say that documents from the late 2000s and early 2010s showed that Remington and Freedom Group officials pursued deals to place their guns into shooter video games as part of a marketing push for new audiences because they were concerned that their consumer base was aging. So, did this marketing campaign even work? We have established that real-world weapon manufacturers were in fact dealing with video game developers in order to market their products in a virtual game. Was this marketing scheme an actual success though? Al Russo, a former Remington marketing executive, in a deposition stated that if you saw any part of what Modern Warfare 1, he got the name wrong, it was to shoot them, shoot them, shoot them, adding, it was not what our products were meant to be portrayed, suggesting that the product on display in Call of Duty wasn't even really portrayed as the company Remington had intended. Following on from this, the sales of the actual assault rifle in real life, the ACR, were underwhelming. The ACR eventually was discontinued as a product. This begs the question, so what? A real life gun was marketed in a video game, but nobody even really cared. And ultimately, the marketing wasn't even a success. So what is the issue? Why is this even problematic for a company like Activision? I'm sure this is the question that is on the lips of so many people. Well, it proved to be very expensive for Remington, who was sued and settled for $73 million by the parents of those killed in the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre. In 2019, the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled that Remington could be held legally responsible for their marketing practices. Whilst it must be noted this wasn't solely regarding the practice of advertising to a younger audience in video games, it did form a large part of it. Wayne LaPierre, a National Rifle Associate Executive Vice President, was quoted as saying that the video game industry is a callous, corrupt, and corrupting shadow industry that sells and sows violence against its own people. A very damning quote. Whilst Activision initially avoided any liability with regard to this mass shooting, it opened the door for potential claims against them in the future. More on this later on. EA, a competitor of Activision and the developer of both the Battlefield and Medal of Honor video game franchises, made a commitment in 2013 to stop pursuing licensing deals with weapon manufacturers, showing that there was a fear that liability would eventually come. So, as of 2024, what is the situation in terms of the legal liability of Activision? On the 24th of May 2024, families of school children who were shot at the Robb Elementary School in 2022 filed 2 lawsuits against Activision, Instagram, and a weapons manufacturer, alleging that they helped train and equip teenage gunmen who committed the massacre. This family are represented by the exact same lawyer who saw the families of the Sandy Hook victims receive a settlement fee of $75 million, with again the marketing practices of the weapon manufacturers as well as Activision being called into question. Whilst there hasn't been a legal link made between the video games causing gamers to become violent, the focus of any litigation has been the mere use of Call of Duty as a marketing tool for these weapon manufacturers. The natural question which follows from this is whether Call of Duty has a duty of care to the victims affected by these tragedies. Whilst not the focus of this specific video, it could be a very interesting topic to research in the future. It remains to be seen what the outcome of this lawsuit will be, but it's clear that the use of licensed weapons in Call of Duty does lead to legal liability for Activision, and that is a key reason as to why in recent years they've stepped away from using licensed weapon names in their games. One of the biggest misconceptions as to the removal of the licensed names of the Call of Duty weapons is that Activision are being cheap and not wanting to pay these licensing deals, or that the weapon manufacturers have decided to stop letting them use the names. So far as the experts are concerned, this isn't really an issue. The US Supreme Court struck down a California law in 2011 that restricted the sale of violent video games to minors because the law infringed on a constitutionally protected speech protected by the First Amendment. Whilst it is the opinion of academics that the court should have deferred to the legislature and experts who study video games and their effects before quickly determining that this rapidly advancing and increasingly interactive technology presents no new challenges to the First Amendment jurisprudence of freedom of speech, the ruling resulted in as much. This meant that video games were given the same legal standing as both TV and books, which generally speaking do not need to license a product before depicting them in that form of media. As such, since 2011, it's claimed amongst legal experts that they are unaware of any case in which a weapons manufacturer has filed suit against a gaming company, even if trademark weapons were used. Stephen Chan, a trademark expert at Georgetown Law, stated that when it comes to balancing trademark and First Amendment issues, your use is probably okay unless it had no artistic relevance or it was deliberately misleading. With Ross Damenberg, a lawyer and the author of the American Bar Association's legal guide to video game development, argued that legally speaking, depicting a gun in a video game is no different to depicting a spatula in a video game. Ultimately, the question is, will we ever get gun names back in Call of Duty? Given the two most recent iterations, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 2022 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 2023, completely disregarding the traditional weapon names in favour of these new platform names, it seems very unlikely, especially with Activision now being embroiled in a lawsuit with regard to the marketing practices of these weapon manufacturers putting their guns in video games. It seems highly unlikely we will ever be getting gun names back in Call of Duty. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below.